The 3-second rule is one of the most important rules when fighting in Fortnite. Yeah, nobody knows about it. The rule goes as follows. Once every third second, you need awareness over the opponent you're fighting. If you lose awareness for 4 seconds, you slow down until you yet again see him. This can be done by boxing up, which is the most normal response, or sitting on height, waiting for him to make a move so you see him again. You do not want to aggressively push someone if you've lost awareness over them for 4 seconds or more. The reason this way of fighting works is that our brain can very easily predict every possible move the enemy makes in the following 3 seconds after we see him. Anything more than that and it becomes guessing. Our brain can't understand all the plays an opponent can make in a span of 4, 5, 6 or 7 seconds without having seen exactly where they are. Using the 3-second strategy in every fight you play in ranked, creative or tournaments will instantly make you way more consistent. You will rarely ever take damage you're not able to trade, and if you follow this principle when practicing in the following days, you'll find yourself making better and better plays to eliminate whoever you're fighting. The same rule applies to duos or any other mode. Awareness is king. Now that you've understood the most important principle for winning fights more consistently, let me show you a way to make fighting easier in just 5 minutes and by clicking a few buttons. This is done by downloading Hone, an FPS boosting software that I've personally used for the last year, and we've actually partnered up for this video. To download Hone and increase your FPS and decrease your input delay, simply go to the description below. Click the first link and hit the download button. Then when it's downloaded, go through the installation process by simply clicking next. Then check the box that says that you accept the terms and privacy policy. Obviously, feel free to take whatever time you need to read through this before accepting, and then hit accept and install. Then you'll have to sign in through your browser. This is simply done by clicking authenticate. If you don't already have an account, make one and you'll be good to go. When the program opens up, you'll see a long list of optimizations. They also have detailed descriptions under each and every one, so you know exactly what you're doing when turning one on. For example, here you can see they have an option to turn on gaming optimizations, and slightly higher up, they have a setting called Disable Windows Power Throttling. That is a setting that is absolutely crucial to have disabled if you're playing on a laptop. In addition to this, they have game-specific tweaks. So if I head to the left-hand side here and go down to Game Optimizations and click in on Fortnite, I can activate Hone Performance, which will optimize my PC for optimal performance. If any one of the tweaks don't feel worth it for you, then you're just one click away from disabling them. When I use Hone, my FPS not only increases by about 30%, but the performance is also more consistent, which makes playing tournaments, customs, and of course creative a lot easier. And the beauty of it all is that it is free to use, but with a slight caveat of only 10 optimizations. With Premium, you get unlimited optimizations and no ads. Check it out in the description below or the pinned comment. To become impossible to fight, there are 10 skills you need to master. If you manage to be a 9 out of 10 in all 10 aspects, you'll pretty much be unstoppable. You see, most players are 8s or 9s on, for example, playing defensively and piece control, but 3 out of 10s on playing aggressively and peeking. So I'll give you the blueprint of what it takes to master all 10 skills to a 9 out of 10 level. It won't be easy, but with hard work and patience, you can become inhumanly good. The first skill is playing aggressively when you're the player applying pressure and the opponent is the one playing defensively. Now, the reason we need to start with this skill is because mastering it allows us not only to more easily execute fights, but it also drastically lowers the time you're fighting if you play aggressively at a high level, minimizing the risk of getting third-partied and losing shields and mats. Starting a fight off, you always want to try and get as hard entry tags as possible. Already here, a lot of people make a few major mistakes. They make a bad peek to go for AR tags, they use their shotgun when they should use their AR, or they simply miss out on opportunities for entry tags because their awareness is on their builds and edits, and not on the opponent they're about to fight. The biggest mistake when it comes to entry tags, however, is using the wrong gun to get the first tags in a fight. You see, the vast majority of players react to getting hit, whether that be getting hit for 7 damage with a shotgun or 90 damage with an AR. So even if your shotgun is in your hand and you can get an okay shotgun shot starting a fight, it's often better to swap to your AR and then shoot, because wasting a shotgun shot for like 20 damage is a massive flaw when it comes to fighting, given that you could have easily done more damage with another gun. Some good players, however, do react to you going for opening tags just by looking at you. They understand instantly whether the starting trade is worth it or not, but this is very rarely. Most opponents you'll meet in a cash cup will attempt to trade with you for some entry tags. How you respond to the damage you do is also incredibly important when it comes to to mastering aggression. A lot of lower tier players play the exact same way whether they tag someone for 40, 80 or 160 damage. But this can cause you to get sent back to the lobby, as the players you're facing will respond to your aggression extremely differently depending on their health. A rule of thumb is to play slowly and reactively if you're not able to crack your opponent when going for entry tags. The less you tag your opponent, the slower you should play, because chances are very high that he will make a counterplay to your aggression. If you crack someone when getting the initial tags, getting right into the box if possible is more often than not the best play you can go for, especially considering a shotgun body shot is often enough to eliminate your opponent after getting good entry tags. However, being aware and seeing how your opponent is reacting will always be your best security to succeed aggressively. Occasionally you have to play from safe peaks when fighting aggressively. This is especially typical in duo tournaments when you are in higher elo lobbies. The two best aggressive setups you can make to safely pressure your opponents are the two I'm about to show in the background footage. The first one is diagonal pressure. It's really good if you know your teammate is on the other side of the boxes your opponents have made and applying pressure to. It makes your enemies stress and often forces a mistake you can capitalize off and get an elim. The second is playing from above. Playing from above is very good, not only because you have high ground, but also because you get the most awareness possible from this position. Meaning if your opponents try to make space, which they very often do, you can piece control their exits in advance and get an easy elim. Another major flaw a lot of players make is reloading when they have a lot of bullets left. When you're playing aggressively and have the health advantage, you need to try to stop your opponent from healing. A massive mistake people make is reloading their SMG or AR when they have like 10 or 15 bullets remaining. Naturally, there are times where you have time to reload your gun, but reloading at the wrong time can very often cause the fire in to become much more difficult. Using a few bullets to apply pressure to your opponent's wall, then pickaxing, then using a few more bullets is very effective to apply constant pressure. Using all your bullets instantly after you've tagged someone hard is a big no-no, as you're giving them a free pass to get some heals off. The one exception to this rule is if you can bleed a bullet through the wall and secure the elim that way. Being good at facing builds is another highly effective skill to force out mistakes in your opponents when playing aggressively. If you pickaxe a wall, break it, and get a stair or cone in the box, your opponent will most likely make a move, make more space, or simply drop down. If you're able to have high tier awareness to the point where you can capitalize off his reaction to you facing builds, you'll be a successful fighter. This tip is especially important for my high ping viewers, as taking walls is nearly impossible for players on high ping, but facing works even on 150 ms. Piece control and facing builds go hand in hand when it comes to playing aggressively, but more on that later. Moving on, we need to talk about playing defensively. Now, a lot of you guys watching are probably already pretty good at being defensive, because a lot of players seem to be. But in order for us to improve and master the skill, we need to ask the question, what exactly is it that makes a good defensive fighter? The answer is quite simple: being able to take the opportunities you're given. Not taking the chances when they're given to you is something I see in a lot of players who aren't at a particularly high level. Naturally, it can be very difficult to know what is a good, bad, and a great opportunity. So I'll try my best to explain how to notice good opportunities when fighting defensively. What good opportunities are also depends heavily on factors like your current strengths and weaknesses, how much HP you're on, and what kind of materials and weapons you have. So keep that in mind when playing. A lot of taking good opportunities comes from your building setup when playing defensively. A lot of lower tier players don't even have a cone in their box. And let me tell you, this is a problem when you start getting into higher ranks in ranked, or even worse, high elo lobbies in tournaments. Because I'll assure you that good players will punish you by placing a cone or stair in your box if you haven't pre-placed one of the two. The first good way to spot a defensive opportunity is if you can do a solid peek against your opponent. This is very typical when you fight someone and they stand on a stair directly on your wall. Trusting your peeks comes from knowing how to actually peek. I'll talk in depth later on how to perform perfect peeks every time. And if you're curious right now and wonder how to successfully peek, feel free to use the video chapters and skip to the peeking part of this video. Doing peeks on your opponents when they're playing aggressively heavily depends on executing the peek at the right time, or in other words, getting the timing right. In defensive fights, sometimes the opportunity just isn't there to perform a peek and do some damage. This can often be because your opponent has good movement and understanding of how you're playing. If you see that your opponent can read your plays and moves, then doing peeks isn't the right play. You'll easily be able to understand whether your opponent can read you based off his movement when playing aggressively. Pre-fires are also a phenomenal way to punish aggression from opponents no matter how they apply pressure. Pre-fires, just like peeks, comes down to understanding timing. If you want to succeed at a high level in fights, pre-fires are a must to understand. Pre-fires when playing defensively are infinitely easier than pre-fires when playing aggressively. The easiest pre-fire is when your opponent is pickaxing your wall. When your opponent is using their gun, doing pre-fires is a lot harder. But with practice, you'll also be able to succeed when they're doing this method. The one super negative thing about pre-fires is that if you are someone who is on the higher side when it comes to ping, you will sometimes take a lot more damage than someone who has lower ping than you. Not to say that it isn't possible to pre-fire on high ping, but if you're getting pressured with something like a SMG, then pre-firing on high ping is a bad idea because so many bullets will bleed through. Build edits and resets are also heavily viable if you're good at pre-firing. Doing a wide edit then reset just for your opponent to shoot the wall so you can get a free shot off is one of the most effective ways to deal damage defensively without taking any back. Now of course, these three ways of playing defensively are some super solid ways to deal damage back, but sometimes wide editing when someone is pressuring you is the best thing you can do. You see this all the time from pro players. Being able to do this skill at a high level requires great game sense that can be developed from grinding things like Zone Wars, Realistics, and Ranked. Because I'm sure you've all had the feeling that right now I could just wide edit on this guy that I'm fighting. And when you get that feeling, you just know he isn't gonna be able to hit you back. That's your game sense talking. And the more you play, the more you should trust that. I think the most important part of developing good defensive fighting abilities is always being ultra calm even when you're low on HP. One big reason behind why a lot of people improve quite slowly is because when they get tagged really low, they start building castles and spinning around like fidget spinners, placing builds everywhere, instead of just slowing down, looking the opponent in the eye and thinking, how can I deal damage back? It's also important for me to emphasize that your first priority when playing defensively is making sure all your bullets in your weapons are reloaded, not healing. I see this time and time again. Players not reloading, but going instantly to a mini. Then they get pressured, but just get the mini off. Congratulations, you just went from 50 to 75 HP. That doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is you being ready to shoot your gun and do counter damage, so that your opponent will slow down so much that you can fully heal. Additionally, when you pop minis, bigs, or whatever to the point where you get it off on the second someone is taking your wall, you put yourself in a much worse position compared to if you play slow and play for counter damage. Because it is much easier to pressure someone who is popping minis and bigs compared to someone standing in their box confidently reloading. When you've been successful in dealing damage back playing defensively, you want to try to wrap up the fight. And if you use the tricks we talked about earlier when talking about playing aggressively, you'll be able to send any player back to the lobby. But remember, if you're gonna go for it, don't hesitate. Flip that switch from defensively to aggressively instantly if you feel as though it is the right play to do. Now, sometimes it might not be the right thing to do. Sometimes you might want to take your time, fully heal up, and play it slow. But what you choose to do, of course, depends on the situation. There are many factors that go into what you should do, like is there any third parties? How much counter damage did you do? How is your opponent playing? And so forth. At the end of the day, what's important to understand is that it's 100 times better dying going for something you think is a good opportunity than just getting bullied by your opponent. Being good at defensive and aggressive fighting as two individual skills is very common, but being able to combine the two at a high level is the third skill, tempo switching, the skill of knowing when to play fast and when to play slow. Now, there's no hard rules in terms of when you should play aggressively and when you should play defensively. The main issue is that a lot of people fail to take opportunities when they're given to them because they simply hesitate for too long to switch the tempo in a fight. And this very often occurs when you need to go from defensive to aggressive fighting. Being able to recognize when your opponent is at a weak point in a fight and acting upon that spotted weakness is crucial if you ever want to become successful at a high level in competitive Fortnite. Most great players are able to make good decisions in a split second. Getting this ability and understanding often comes from three things. The first being hours upon hours of playing things like creative 1v1s, 2v2s, or 3v3s against good players. Ranked, and of course scrims. The reason I emphasize playing against good players in creative is because if you only play against players who are at a low level, you'll get away with making a lot of mistakes, simply because they're not good enough to punish you for the mistakes other players at a higher level easily would've. Sure, playing against sweaty players might not be as fun as playing against your IRL friends who you beat quite easily, but if becoming the best player you can possibly be is on your to-do list, then you need to try and find good players to grind with and against. And I'm not saying you need to get in a friend group with tier 1 or tier 2 pros, but find someone else who is passionate about improving and grind and learn together with them. This way, you'll easily become infinitely better than if you just grind on your own, or play with someone who doesn't take the game seriously at all. Next up, we have fighting skill number 4. And that is of course mechanics. With mechanics, I mean building, editing, and movement. I know a lot of you guys watching already more or less have the needed fundamentals in terms of mechanics. 90% of you guys sitting at home watching this video have good enough building and editing speed to succeed at a very high level in tournaments. But sadly, good mechanics isn't the speed of your builds and edits. Thinking that good mechanics are fast builds and edits is the biggest misconception in the Fortnite community. Great mechanics is being able to build and edit at a very consistent rate whilst continuously having awareness over your opponent, ready to punish any mistake he makes. That is good mechanics. Sadly, most Fortnite talents don't understand this simple fact. And whenever I watch mechanically gifted masterminds play that honestly should succeed, the common reason behind why they don't is because they miss out on so many opportunities in fights and endgames. Because they're more focused on their builds and edits rather than the opponents they're actually fighting. A simple rule of thumb is, if you can't have awareness at minimum once every third second with your current mechanics, you're probably doing way too much in terms of building and editing. If you want to become a good fighter, you need the right fundamentals to practice upon, and playing slowly and having awareness is a much better way to go about it, compared to playing fast and having very limited awareness. And on the topic of building upon the right fundamentals, you need to learn the basics behind peeking in Fortnite. Now, for some reason, there are basically no easily understandable videos on this topic on YouTube. I think it's because most players, and YouTubers especially, honestly just don't know how to perform perfect peeks. So let me be the one to make this crystal clear. The most popular peek in Fortnite is the peanut butter edit. And in order to perform it perfectly, the first thing we need to do is look at these gray transparent lines. These lines are an indicator of where we can position ourselves to not get hit. A lot of people use the blue edit menu as an indicator of where to stand when performing a peek. But if you do this and come up against someone with experience, you will 100% take damage. The timing of which you confirm your edit to make the peanut butter is obviously very important. You need to confirm your edit when you can't move any closer to the wall. If you confirm it just 1 millisecond too early, you can get hit. When you are all the way into the wall, you see that your head is under the gray transparent line of the edit you're about to make, and you're continuously holding your W key or joystick forward into the wall. Then you can confirm the edit and perform a sideways jump to the left to perform a totally perfect peek. A mistake nearly everyone makes is pressing S on their keyboard when jumping to the left and going for a P shot. If you want to perform the perfect peek, W and A, or joystick forward and slightly to the left, is the way you want to go about it. Going backwards when performing a peek will naturally make you a way easier target to hit. Another thing you must keep in mind is the setup of the box you're performing the peek from. A peanut butter peek is not perfect unless you have a cone in your box and a flat above your head. The cone will elevate you slightly up so that when you jump and perform the peek, your head will hit the flat above you, pushing you down quickly, making you a super hard target to hit. Don't get me wrong, you'll still be hard to hit even without the flat above you. However, if you come up against someone really good, chances are relatively high that you will get punished for not having the flat above. All the same fundamentals can be used for window peeks. Window peeks are some of the most underrated peeks in the game if done correctly. Let me walk you through a perfect window peek. You begin by having a box with a cone in it. Then before editing your wall, you look at the gray transparent lines of the window you're about to edit, whether that be the left, middle, or right window. When you see that your character is fully protected behind the peek, you confirm the edit. The movement showcased in slow motion in the background footage is called sidestepping. It's a rightwards movement cancelled by a crouch and a leftwards sidestep to get behind cover yet again. Hitting a shot after doing this movement will for most of you be very difficult in the start. But if you can slowly but surely practice this edit and movement in creative, trust me, your fighting long term will become so much more consistent. Performing the peanut butter or window peek is of course also doable when you're further behind in the box. When you're further behind in the box, you need to be comfortable holding your A button or your joystick all the way to the left so that you're hugging the wall. I see a lot of players doing peeks where they stand just barely to the left of the middle of the cone in their box, and doing a peanut butter and get traded for 100+ damage because of their terrible movement and positioning before performing the peek. Now, don't get me wrong, whether you get traded or not naturally depends on your opponent's position on your wall. But regardless, you should practice upon the right fundamentals and start learning to hug the left wall. In the start, it's going to feel very unnatural and difficult, but start slowly in creative doing the showcase movement and peeks, and start building that flawless muscle memory, one day at a time. I also need to note that peeks when you're hugging the wall with your W button are better than peeks from far behind in your box. Not only are you harder to hit, but you'll also be able to deal way more damage. If you understand the mechanics behind perfect peeks, becoming a top tier piece control player can very easily be done. Now, the type of piece control I am going to focus on is protected piece control, where there's a 0% chance of you getting hit. Or, in other words, skill number 6. Piecing up opponents can of course also be done with wide edits, and that's a very good way to piece someone if they're not aware. There's no point in setting up a perfect peek and piece controlling from behind it if your opponent isn't even looking at you, but that kind of piece control is the kind that absolutely everyone knows, whereas perfect piece control is not. The principles of perfect piece control are very much the same as perfect peeks. Before doing an edit, you look at the gray transparent lines. Make sure you're protected behind your edit and you start piece controlling. These mechanics are very much unvisited in the Fortnite community. Nearly nobody thinks about this when practicing creative or ranked, and the mechanics of full piecing someone from behind a fully protected peanut butter edit is very different from full piecing someone from a wide edit. The mouse movement is 100% different, and learning the muscle memory of fully protected piece is a journey that's gonna take a long time, but it's gonna be worth it because it's such a unique skill that nearly nobody yet has mastered. Protected window piece is probably the most overpowered way to easily deal a chunky amount of damage or eliminate opponents. Being able to practice these perfect peeks and then piecing from behind them will actually elevate your game so incredibly much. If there's one thing I need you all to take away from this video, it is to start setting aside some time in creative to learning the muscle memory of fully protected piece control. Start incredibly slow. Make sure you are indeed behind the wall you're piecing from and understand how the grid system works from those protected peaks. The 7th fighting skill is awareness. I've been talking about awareness non-stop in this video, but for good reason. Awareness is the most important factor behind succeeding in fights, and without the knowledge of the importance of awareness, your practice will become super ineffective. Everything you do in fighting practice should be based off having awareness over the opponents you're battling, and not allowing them to make mistakes and get away with them. You want to be that guy who always eliminates your enemies when they mess up. That is the way you become an unstoppable fighter. The way you do this is to play slow enough to the point where you almost never, or preferably never, lose track of your opponent. This goes for playing both defensively and aggressively. If you lose your opponent in a fight, your awareness needs work. Awareness is a combination both of what you see and hear, and you gotta be able to use these two senses. Learning auditory awareness in Fortnite is something nobody ever talks about, but it's super important. So think about that the next time you hop on. Now, skill number 8 is high ground control. The reason being able to consistently control height in fights is so extremely important is due to the fact that the skill ceiling of fighting from high ground is much higher than being someone who plays from low ground. Now, don't get me wrong, you can be good from a low ground position in a fight, but if you today are better at fighting from the low ground rather than the high ground, just know that you may have 20 different plays you can go for in any given fight, whereas from height, you can probably quadruple the amount of potential plays to eliminate any opponent. That is why it is so important to force yourself to play height in fights when pracking, whether it be in ranked, creative, or tournaments. Not only is it easier to shoot down on someone in terms of setting yourself up for easier shots, it's also easier to spend less resources and have way better awareness around you when fighting from height, limiting the amount of times you get third-partied, and additionally being able to spot potential plays easier. Now, on the topic of potential plays, I also need to talk about skill number 9, which is reading your opponent. Right when you start a fight, you can, if you are at an alright level, see whether your opponent is good or bad. Signs of someone being bad is if you, for example, go for a beam on them and you see that they start stressing when building walls to protect themselves. Whereas if you can clearly tell that they're confident and calm, chances are high they are good. Now, the reason mastering the skill of reading opponents is so important is because sometimes in tourneys, you may want to disengage fights if you see that someone is good or confident. Whereas if you clearly can tell that they're unconfident, full committing to a fight versus them may be the play that turns around a bad game. I know a ton of you guys watching me are already good at this skill, but if this is something you haven't heard about before, then start trying to understand before fighting someone whether they're good or bad, because it may very well help you out tremendously in upcoming tournaments. It's a bit cheesy to add this as a skill, but knowing how to find good practice on the daily is the final skill of today's video. In simpler terms, just knowing what to do with your time to get the most amount of improvement possible day over day. Because the truth is, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. It's how you use those hours that sets you apart from the competition. Now, I want to focus on 3 main super effective ways of improving at fighting faster than anyone else. The first way is by W keying in tournaments. If you know that an upcoming tournament is one that you can't qualify for or make money in, then playing for improvement is the best thing you can do. And often that is W keying every game. You see, in tournaments, people play it very seriously. They play to the absolute best of their ability. That means that every fight you get in, you'll get quality fighting practice. If you, in the span of a 3-hour tournament, can get tens of high quality fights in duos, for example, your improvement on that day, fighting-wise, compared to someone who played placement in said tournament, will be much more impressive. The second way of improving fighting is by playing wagers. Now, wagers are against Epic Games' terms of service, so I can't sit here and recommend playing wagers. But for educational purposes, I'll say this: all the best fighters in the world have played an unhealthy amount of wagers against good players. When playing wagers, you'll get punished for every mistake you make, and your skill set, if you do it every day for a year, will be nearly flawless due to how good most wager players are, especially in the biggest regions of EU and NAC. I recommend mainly playing realistics, but sonors are really good too. And the final effective way of practicing fighting is by playing scrims. In scrims, you usually try your best to play for endgame, but if you just play your games a little more aggressively, you'll develop a very good fighting game sense, since scrim players will be better than the players you'll meet in, for example, ranked. It's also a different way of fighting since so many players will be alive in the different zones, meaning you'll have to be aware so that you don't get third-partied. The essence of skill 10 is that you need to spend your time wisely if you want to become an unstoppable fighter. Do the boring things nobody else will, because following an extraordinary routine will end in extraordinary results. It's just a matter of time.